Philip Shepard, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
It's lovely to be here, Howard. Thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to this conversation so much. I was introduced to your work probably 3 months ago. Someone told me to get Radical Wholeness, and it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. And as soon as I started reading it, I understood why. And we met last month in Greensboro. I took your wonderful 2-day workshop, and I am just buzzing with excitement to share this with my listeners and as far as we can reach it out into the world. Let's start with kind of maybe just a basic definition of wholeness for us, so that we have a starting point. Yeah, the easy stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's a valid starting point because on the one hand, it seems so obvious. Wholeness is that which includes all that is. On the other hand, we live in a culture that systematically diverts our gaze from wholeness and has actually defined wholeness in a way that means something else. So what I mean by that is we think of the wholeness of the self, or the wholeness of the pen. We think of wholeness as something that has a boundary.
Mm.
When you're encouraged to become whole in body, mind, and spirit, underlining that metaphor, that aspiration, is this idea that there are three parts of the self, and if you can allow each of them to flourish and to come into harmony with the others, you will be whole. So it's like this idea that the wholeness exists within the case of my skin, and that's not what wholeness is. Wholeness has no boundary. There's not a place where wholeness starts and something else begins. And the nature of our reality is inescapably that of a whole. There's nothing in the cosmos that doesn't affect everything else within it. Everything leans on everything. Everything depends on everything. So to think of wholeness in any way other than the living, borderless whole within which your life is held, is to imagine wholeness as something other than what it is.
Yeah, and what really touched me deeply as I began reading your book is I've heard all this before, right? And I've read, Larry Dossey's work and David Bohm and this idea, and quantum entanglement and all that stuff, but it all felt very theoretical. Like, yeah, there's this universe out there and it's ineffable and unknowable, but day to day, I am a separate holon. I'm a boundaried individual, and this is how things are. What you kind of showed me for sort of two things right off the bat. One is that this is very culturally determined, and that we are totally blind to how unwhole we are because of our culture, and that it has real and significant consequences for our lives and for the life of the planet. And you make a really good case that pretty much everything that's going wrong that's on the planet is due to our inadequate appreciation of wholeness and our inability to sense it.
Yeah, that inability to sense it is at the core of my book, Radical Wholeness. We have been systematically desensitized to feel wholeness. Now, if wholeness is the inescapable nature of our reality, that means we've been systematically desensitized to feel reality. So then what are we, living in a fantasy? And I think we are. In fact, the fantasy has been framed for us. The nature of the fantasy to which our culture is attached is what Joseph Campbell used to describe the mythological tyrant. He describes the tyrant as the man of self-achieved independence. And that's such a seductive phrase, self-achieved independence. I think that doubles as the American dream.
Yeah, that's what we want.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let me add it. And the images that come to mind are of the penthouse suite lording it over the city, or the mansion on the hill with the perimeter fence and the security around it. And we are goaded, we are trained to long for independence. But you can search the cosmos and not find one example anywhere of independence. It's a fantasy. It doesn't exist. So then to come back to the reality and the ways in which, I mean, you just, one aspect of our culture, the education system. So our whole approach to life and kids and education would be so different if we took as the aim of education to help each child into its unique wholeness. But what we do instead is we take these young, tender kids and put them at desks and tell them to sit still and pay attention to the lesson and fill their heads with the right answers and the right facts. And meanwhile, the body's energy is not just suppressed, it's a liability. If that energy isn't controlled, you end up in the principal's office. And to suppress the body's energy in that way is identical to suppressing the body's intelligence. So we are fostered into this sundering of our thinking from our being, and we end up we believe that we can think more clearly with the segregated intelligence of the head than we can with the intelligence of the whole of our being.
Right. And you used two beautiful metaphors from nature that immediately touched me in my own body. One is the whirlpool in a river, right? Where, yeah, it's a thing, but it's not a thing. It's a process. And then taking that to a tree and saying, like, where does the tree end? What are the whole boundaries of the tree? Of course, if you think about it for 8 seconds, and there aren't any.
If you imagine that it's this thing that because we live in our heads, we fracture the world into independent things. That's how we're trained to see the world, and other cultures see it differently. But when to see the tree as a thing is to miss the reality of the tree, because the tree is a process. The tree is changing in every moment of its life. There is sap running, there are cells changing. And as soon as you understand that the tree is a process, then the question you ask is, well, where's the boundary of that process? And certainly the roots are part of the process, and you realize, well, the moisture around the roots is part of the tree's process, and the sun is part of the tree's process, and the oceans beyond the mountains that bring rain are part of the tree. And ultimately, the process of the tree, you realize, extends to the limit of the cosmos. Right. There is no boundary. And right. That's the wholeness of the tree every bit as much as it's the wholeness of each of us.
Right. And that can sort of stay in the realm of comfortable theology, right? Sunday morning thoughts, except that you smack us with research from Wall Street, right? Which I know you brought up early in your public talk in Greensboro. Can you describe what that research is and what it means to you?
Absolutely. What we've discovered is that the body actually knows 1,000,000 times more than the conscious mind. It processes 1,000,000 times more bits of information than we can consciously be aware of. So this, tyrannical, self-important, conscious thinker in the head, which believes it's in charge and is rightly the governor of the self, is running on 1,000,000th of the information that courses through our being. So the research you're talking about, John Coates, an interesting guy because he started as a high frequency trader on Wall Street, and then he left and became a neuroscientist. And then he came back to Wall Street to do some research because there was this phenomenon that he'd experienced whereby he would make a trade and just know it was a winner. He would just know it. And sure enough, it was. And he realized, well, that's a real phenomenon that's never been studied. And what's going on there? So he did 2 rounds of research. In the first round of research, he got a group of traders and he had them sort of answer a questionnaire after a trade. How well do you believe this is? What do you think the risks are? That sort of thing. But at the same time, he was measuring the body's responses to the trade, including cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And then he looked at, it doesn't take long to know in high frequency trading whether a trade is a winner or not. So he looked at the results of the trade, and the conscious assessment had no correlation at all to whether the trade was a success or not. But the body in every instance knew. The body knew whether it was a dog or a winner. And so he said, well, that's interesting. Let's do another round. And he said, if it's true that the body is so much more subtly aware, even in this highly abstract realm of Wall Street trading, then people who are more in touch with their bodies should do better at trading. So he got a group of Wall Street traders and outfitted them with a heart rate monitor that only he could read. And he would text them at intervals during the day and say, what's your heart rate? What's your heart rate? And they weren't allowed to palpate. They weren't allowed to feel their heart rate with their fingers. They had to feel it in their body. And some guys had no idea. It was obvious they were just guessing, and others were really, really close to being able to feel their heart rate. And then he took those results and looked at the previous year's trades. And the traders who were more in touch with their heart rate did significantly better than those who weren't. But not only that, the older traders did significantly better, as though the Wall Street environment were selecting for that ability to feel what the body knows.
Right. Which reminds me of, jumping way to a different topic that you cover in the book. I love this so much. You talk about the phrase survival of the fittest, right? And it never occurred to me before, but you convinced me in like 3 seconds that it is a completely meaningless phrase that is simply tautological, right? Could you talk a little bit about that, maybe in terms of this phenomenon of the selected traders?
Yeah. So, survival of the fittest. You say, well, what does fitness mean? Is it the biggest? Well, no, because there are many times where the smallest has survived, and the biggest is it the smartest? No, is it and what it comes down to is survival of the fittest ultimately means whatever has survived is the fittest. So it's the survival of whatever survives. There's the tautology of it, right? That's all the phrase means, and it's erroneous in the assumptions that lie behind it, because ultimately you look at evolution, and what survives is what is most in harmony with its environment. So really, it's the principle behind evolution is survival of the most harmonious. And harmony doesn't mean not killing. You introduce wolves to Yellowstone Park, and the beaver population thrives in this bizarre thing because the wolves hunt the deer, and so the deer keep to the forest, and so trees can now grow by the riverbank and beavers can come back. But wolves are a necessary part of that harmony. And of course, you take it back to the Wall Street traders, and they are coming into the harmony of their being rather than excluding what the body knows and running on what the head has determined in isolation from what the body knows.
Right. And, for me, it's very easy to vilify Wall Street, to vilify the financial system. And yet it's only, it's vilifiable when it is separated from this holistic knowing that if you think about, Wall Street or the financial markets in terms of their natural analogs of like the most efficient redistribution of resources from where they are overabundant to where they are needed, you can see how like any of our institutions can be saved in a way by being expanded into this unboundaried wholeness.
Yeah, or they can be contracted from wholeness. So the legal requirement of a corporation to act exclusively in the best interest of the shareholder excludes the environment, excludes so many other variables, and until our laws become grounded in a more holistic principle, damage will be done.
Right. So there's two sentences that I was getting ready to text to my friend who's a former hunter who became a vegan, who still really embraces hunting culture. And the two sentences were, and I can't find it in the book right now, but I think I have them in memory. Wild predators kill. I'm losing it, but wild predators kill in service. We just take what we want. Sort of the difference between the way we consume the world and the way a wild predator. You could say that these Wall Street traders are essentially predators. They're trying to make the best deal for themselves or their firm or their entity. And yet, in the context of wholeness, that kind of energy can serve the whole, or it can degrade the whole.
Yeah, you think of a pack of wolves with a herd of deer. They're not going after the buck. They're not going after the big leader. They're going after the sick. They're going after the weak. When a hunter comes out, the big buck is the one he wants, and that's the leader of the herd. That's what keeps the herd together in all its relationships. And similarly, as you say, with Wall Street, so there's this disjunction between how we understand and feel ourselves and how we understand and feel nature. And that disjunction shows up in the differences between what nature loves and how we react. So nature loves change. I mean, that tree is changing with every second. My body is changing with every second, the world around me. Nature loves diversity. It's not interested in making identical things. Every creation is new. And, that age-old conundrum, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the egg came first because each egg is the combination of two chickens to further evolution and create a new step in that progression. So the diversity of nature is unstoppable. And finally, nature loves service. And there is not a creature born that is not born into service, whether it's the earthworm burrowing in the dank earth, or the starling singing in the tree, or the wolf in the forest. Every creature is born into service. You take that understanding of what nature loves, and you apply it to us as we live in our heads and live out of wholeness. And change is an inconvenience. We don't like change because we've got our plans and we depend on those. And diversity is a threat to us because we want to feel safe, and we want to know what the risks are, and conformity is what we seek. And diversity is an unknown and a threat to us. And service, we serve only ourselves, and we take that to be the obvious entitlement of being a human being.
Right. So I kind of want to jump into like what I'm interested in. I feel like there's a few more layers I'd love to kind of lay down, just because I'm trying to put myself in the headspace of someone who hasn't read your book and experience. So, love for you to talk about in the first chapter. Is so beautiful, the feel at flesh inside, which when I first start reading the book and I see the title of the chapter is feel at flesh inside, I think like some editor must have fallen asleep. But you talk about the five senses, which are obvious objective facts of reality, that we have these five senses, and all of a sudden you say, no, those are cultural artifacts and other cultures do it differently, and thinking that we have five senses makes us see the world in a certain way and makes us not see the world in other ways. Maybe kind of just to lay a foundation for us about some of the ways in which our culture brainwashes us to miss reality.
Yeah, when we are attached to the five senses, it sets up a certain model for how we experience the body. And that model in regard to the senses tells us that, well, a stimulus comes from the outside world. It passes the boundary of the self and arrives on a receptor, whether that's light into the eye or a scent into the nose or sound into the ear. And that receptor sends a signal to the brain to be interpreted. And you realize that all the senses have that model in common. And that's the reason that we don't accept balance as a sense. And there are cultures, I speak in my book of the Anglo-Ewe culture, for whom balance is the primary sense. Well, we can't accept balance as a sense, even though we talk about having a sense of balance. There's a sense organ devoted to it, but balance doesn't uphold the boundary around the self that reinforces our sense of being independent from the world. We are born into the gravitational field of the earth, and it feels us as clearly as we feel it. We're held in a mutual relationship that defies any boundary. And so balance isn't about a stimulus crossing the border of the self and landing on a receptor. It is this felt relationship, and so we disallow it as a sense. And if I go back again to the Anglo-Ewe culture, sesililame, which translates as feel at flesh inside, is their primary way of experiencing the senses. So they feel the world within the spaciousness of the body. They feel the sights of the world in the body. They feel the sounds of the world in the body. And, they have a word that means to listen with the ear, but for them, that's not real listening. Listening is when you feel the world in the body. So they have a porosity that enables them to surrender in a positive sense of the world to what is here now, to this living present that they are part of. And as long as we contract into our five senses, we will sit in the head and interpret the world for ourselves and feel estranged from it and separate from it and hungry to connect with the present, to connect with our lives, but we are baffled in those attempts by the very separation within our being.
All right. But we are our heads, right? Like,
yeah, good point, Howard. Okay, right. Let's look at that. I know, because you think, well, the brain is in the head. It's where we think. And the body's a vehicle. That is such an old metaphor. You find a reference to that in a dialogue of Plato's Timaeus, where he talks about the head as the divine sphere and the body as a vehicle. So it's an old sense. And, as I said, the body is suffused with intelligence. Here's how I think of the body. I experience the body as a resonator. And I feel my body resonating to the world, to the currents of the present in a way I could never, ever consciously delineate. But I feel it. And in that resonance, that is what the Wall Street traders feel. That is what guides the wolf in the forest. There is so much information in the body. And on a physiological level, every cell participates in our thinking, something that Candace Pert really clarified with Molecules of Emotion, that her book. Every living cell participates in our thinking. And then there's this little fact of a brain in the belly that is sort of beginning to leak into our popular understanding, that there is a brain in the belly that is not a subsection of the brain in the head, and we refer to it as the second brain. And in fact, it's our first brain in an evolutionary sense. It is the primary brain of our being.
Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see this, in my community that looks at healthy eating in terms of the microbiome and sort of relationship with mood. And, I think 90% of the serotonin in the body is produced in the gut. But we still, so before I came to your work, I was very much advocating body awareness. And by body awareness, you know where I'm going. I mean that now my head, which is, of course, where I live, is aware of my body. So I'm going to do a meditation, I'm going to do a visualization, or I'm going to do some sort of practice where I am going to become aware of my breathing, or I am going to become aware of my pelvic bowl, of my gut, of my legs. And it's a lot better than not being aware, but it's ultimately, I realize I'm still reinforcing the model that created the separation in the first place.
Yeah, and it sounds so lovely to go into a space and listen to the body, and we're told that listening to the body is embodiment, and just as you say, that phrase, listen to the body, more deeply entrenches the divide between our thinking and our being, because it's saying, in effect, there's a wall between you and the body, and the best you can do is to put your ear to that wall once in a while to find out what's happening on the other side of it. And that's the opposite of embodiment. So embodiment, for me, embodiment is what happens when the whole of my awareness is congruent and attuned to the present. And that cannot happen when I'm in the head. So it's literally the sensation that the center of my awareness drops down through the body and comes to rest in the pelvic bowl. And lest that sound like a fantasy to listeners, it is simply retracing the evolutionary path of our consciousness that began in the early Neolithic era, when we began to control the world around us with agriculture and domesticating animals and building permanent settlements. And when that began, the center of our awareness began to rise again from the pelvic bowl up through the body. And you can trace that etymologically through the history of language. Homer, and I don't know why people don't make, Homer is studied, but he uses a word, phren, P-H-R-E-N, over and over. And it's more often in the plural, but phren means in English mind, and it also means diaphragm. Because that in that Hellenic culture, our center was poised in balance between what I experience as the male pole of my consciousness in the head and the female pole of my consciousness in the pelvic bowl. And I love that at that point of balance, we birthed theater as we know it, and philosophy as we know it, and science as we know it. It's like this sudden flowering that was made possible, and then beyond that, we migrated up into the head. So that dropping of our center of awareness is historically our birthright in that way, and it's also how many other cultures in the world experience their thinking.
Right. Well, I think it's the reason we miss that in Homer is essentially your story is flatland, right? Where there's this two-dimensional world that we're all in. You had a set of experiences when you were a young person that jettisoned you up in the air to be able to see the three-dimensionality, to see the culture as an outsider. I'm constantly being flabbergasted by linguistically how trapped we are. Where and you talk about the difference between head count, how many people are here, and body count, how many people are dead. The head of a corporation, the head and the body. One of the exercises that you teach, the elevator, I was suddenly realizing like that word it means going up, and right, to elevate. And of course, what you're trying to teach us is how to bring our consciousness down. Like it's inescapable.
There's a can I throw a quote at you?
Yeah,
there's a pre-Socratic philosopher, Antisthenes, who made this profound resonant statement that really is pertinent at the moment. He said, "The most useful act of learning in our lives is to unlearn what is untrue." That's been my life. That's been my
yeah. And so I don't think we talked about this, but I'm a contributing author to a book called Whole, WHOLE. It's about the science of nutrition, and I wrote my main author, T. Colin Campbell, had studied and taught reductionist nutrition, which is the way he learned it in terms of nutrients and Krebs cycle. And the farther he got into it, the more he realized, the Krebs chart that we learn in high school biology became so complex as we got deeper and deeper into the individual that ultimately nutrition was unknowable. And instead we want to look at, whole foods and whole systems. And one of the points he makes is that we don't do science anymore. We do technology. And beautiful. So when you talk about, the science being birthed in the Hellenic period where the diaphragm was the center, the chest was the center of being, right? What was there were questions, and what we have now, as it looks like science, is the questions are, how do we monetize this, as opposed to what is truth?
Well, that's a little sobering, and that thing about questions. I think part of the reason things are so out of balance in our world is that again, our education system is devoted to answers, and if you get the right answers, you'll do well, and it does nothing to help kids formulate questions, to test, to challenge. And so you end up with politicians making statements, and someone says, well, that feels right to me, and they glom onto that as the answer without the skill to hold it to account. And I'm so much more interested in questions than answers. It's one of the gifts for me of teaching the workshop, because people bring questions in that I would never have formulated. And my limitation in thinking is not a limit in the way I can come up with answers. My limitation is my limited ability to formulate questions.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a line. I think it's from Goethe. It says, "Nature grows mute under torture," and that if you think about the way science and inquiry is taught, it's almost like those TV shows where they we're trying to stop the terrorist bomb, and we're gonna torture. When you look at animal testing, when you look at atomic research, everything is about applying will and power and force until something cracks under the pressure, as opposed to sort of a holistic view of finding out about the world, which is to be in it and be in relation.
And one of the biggest differences there is our whole agenda is devoted to learning about nature, and we have forgotten how to learn from nature. And nature is our most intimate, wisest teacher. And we don't, to lose the body's resonance is at the same time to lose the ability to be informed by nature, to learn from it. And all we know is how to shatter it and itemize its bits.
So I think this is, for me, is a beautiful segue into the work that I do, which is try to help people be healthier. And this largely revolves around diet, exercise, sleep, stress. And kind of one of the points that I make in my teaching is that what we want to try to do is get back to natural things. That there is, even if we can't prove it with double-blind studies, that it just makes sense that if you're eating what you could have naturally attained on foot without refrigeration and fossil fuels and hierarchies of society, if you moved during the day as if you would have had to move to collect and process that food stuff, that there's this idea that nature can guide us, and we don't have to be so intellectual about reading all the diet books and figuring out our macronutrients. And yet people, it's very hard for people to let go of control, even though paradoxically that control has totally left their lives out of control.
Yeah, I mean, here's the conundrum we face is that when we deaden ourselves to wholeness, when we desensitize ourselves, which happens physically in the body, in the way we hold it, in the way we harbor tensions within it, in the way we compartmentalize its different energies. So as long as we are desensitized in that way to wholeness, it is impossible to feel its guidance. It is guiding us. The guidance is there, as it was for the Wall Street traders in every moment. But it's like if the body is a resonator, it's like we've stuffed it full of cotton balls, and it has lost its resonance. When you no longer are able to feel the guidance of the present, all you can do is guide yourself. You have to. And so you take charge and you make those decisions and you live in the head and machinate over what you should do and how you should do it and when you should do it and all that stuff that we're so familiar with. And so to me, the journey into feeling, as you say, the guidance of nature necessitates a return to the body, and it requires the inner work of discovering how we've mechanized the breath and shut it out of much of the body, how we've divided ourselves, and we find those shadows and those cotton balls and we integrate them, and then there is a spaciousness within our beings that can rest in the guidance of every moment.
So I want to challenge that a little bit from my perspective, in that, there's a movement in the nutrition world called intuitive eating, right, which I deeply appreciate where it's coming from, and at the same time, I think it leads people astray, because So like what my body intuitively feels like it wants is chocolate, right? And people who are addicted to cigarettes, they intuitively want to smoke, and if they don't smoke, they feel worse. So can the intelligence of an embodied being survive a toxic environment? I think you have one line in the book that, like, I think you're quoting someone saying that the smallest unit of health is the community.
Yeah.
So at some point, don't we have to override the body's natural inclinations because we know the toxins that are out there trying to get us?
I love the challenge. So if you are talking to a group of people who've been raised in this culture and live in a divided state and live in their heads and know how to notice the body, you are telling people who have suppressed the body's intelligence to trust that shattered entity. And if you're going to tell somebody to eat intuitively, you need, a year or two of work to allow them to come back to their being, to allow them to feel the breath in their legs, to allow them to feel the energy of the body rather than its materiality. You have to restore the spaciousness to the resonator. And if you don't, then intuition is a faulty device because it's impaired. So here's my contention, is that the addictiveness of our culture is a direct consequence of us having separated from our being. So that intelligence in the pelvic bowl that we spoke of is the ground of your being. And unlike the intelligence in the head, which excels at analysis and systemizing and perspective and yearns to know everything around it objectively, that intelligence in the pelvic bowl attunes to wholeness and integrates and feels the world around it. So it comes into felt relationship rather than known relationship. Now, if you divorce yourself from your being, you leave behind a hole. It's like a black hole within you that yearns to be filled. And then we reach for chocolate and cigarettes and alcohol and gambling and our digital devices and our distractions to try to fill the emptiness we feel within us. So the work that takes us away from addiction, to me, begins with a resensitizing of our bodies, of our being, so that if you can land on the pelvic floor and come to rest there, in my experience, intuitive eating will be just fine. And intuitive eating, in that sense that I'm talking about it, isn't divorced from the understanding that our meat is filled with antibiotics, and our there are vegetables that are laced with chemicals. All of that information, though, can be integrated so that it informs us, it resensitizes us. Mm-hmm. And then when that happens, I trust the body's intelligence.
Gotcha. So the Wall Street traders weren't doing tarot. They were actually looking at financial data, right? So
yes.
So it's not.
And
go ahead.
And if I walked into Wall Street and I communed with my body and tried to pick a winner, it wouldn't happen because I haven't been sensitized to that milieu by the integration of all that information.
Mm. So this comes to one of the most profound definitions that you gift us with, which is your definition of intelligence. And you start out by saying, like, okay, so human beings we're clearly, incredibly intelligent, and our intelligence can be measured on IQ tests as abstract thinking. And if intelligence means we like live well and we don't screw up our earth, then maybe we're not so intelligent after all. You say it much more poetically, but you have a different definition of intelligence that I find incredibly empowering. Can you talk about that? Because I think it relates to the ability to navigate a toxic world.
Yeah. It's not that I dispute abstract reasoning as a part of our intelligence, but to me, it's a narrow wavelength on a huge spectrum. And that spectrum, I would first of all call sensitivity. And I really believe sensitivity is the foundation of our intelligence. And I don't care what sensitivity it is. It can be a sensitivity to the sound of rain on the roof, to a child playing with paint, to Mozart, to legal argument, to Wall Street trading. Any sensitivity.
And by sensitivity, what do you mean? Like the ability to discern nuance, or what is sensitivity? Because I think because we think of it as mostly a bad thing.
Sensitivity, yeah, I know, and that's part of our demeaning of the female, right? And there are people who are called too sensitive. Mm-hmm. Sensitivity is just the ability to attune to information that is coming through you. So the retina is sensitive to light. Now, the nature of sensitivity is that it's reactive. If the retina didn't react, we wouldn't see. That reactivity has to be grounded in order to become coherent. Now, we live in a culture that tacitly prohibits us from being grounded. It tells us over and over in a million ways, up is good and down is bad. So that in terms of intelligence, I don't think there's such a thing as too sensitive. I think what there is sensitivities that haven't become grounded. And when it's not grounded, the information they're accessing can't be made coherent. So if I were to name intelligence and characterize it, I would characterize it as grounded sensitivity. And we're very, very, very clever in our modern world, but we've forgotten how to live intelligently. And that forgetfulness on our part is a lack of groundedness and the fact that we've been so systematically desensitized.
Right. So I'm looking out my window here and at my blackberry patch, and so I'm thinking about like intelligence for me in terms of like, does it grow food? And I'm mostly colorblind, so I have a hard time picking the ripe berries. Like I'll bring in berries as a gift for my family, and they'll eat a few and then leave the rest. But I'm very sensitive in when I put a broad fork in the ground to know whether the soil is aerated enough.
Yeah.
And those aren't, like I read a book about it, right? I read like, here's a broad fork, but until I did it and felt in my body and then got feedback, like, so that's kind of what you mean by a grounded sensitivity. Like I'm smart enough to grow food now, and I wasn't having just read the books.
Yes, exactly right. So we have forgotten as a culture what integration means, just as we've forgotten what wholeness is. So we think integration happens as we gather and paste together all these bits of information. And that's not wholeness. That's patchwork. And it's not analog, it's digital. And what happens as you take a bit of information and you can literally drop it through the body and allow it to come to rest on the pelvic floor, and it will be reborn as a sensitivity. Or you can take the information about ground needs to be aerated and all the rest of it, and the body then feels that fork going into the earth and feels the difference between when it's aerated and when it's not. and the body recognizes it. It's not, there's a danger in my work because my work is so concerned with counterbalancing the dire polarities of our culture. So there's a possible misperception that I'm about, going backwards to the pelvic bowl, going back. And no, I think we are at the brink, I hope, of a new shift in consciousness. And I think that shift will happen in the body, and it will bring the brilliant analytical part of our intelligence in the head into union with that deep, grounded, felt intelligence in the pelvic bowl, so that we experience our consciousness as not a localized intelligence, but as an axis that runs through the body from the pelvic floor to the head. And like a bar magnet, it holds a field around it that attunes us to the world.
Mm. All right. And I love, that you do point out that like the world is in a pretty dire position, and each of us, our power lies in our own shift, our own integration and move to wholeness as really the only leverage we have that's not going to perpetuate the problem. And so I'm seeing my work in that context now, which feels much more beautiful and pleasant and holy. And I'm still finding I'm taking people from this current paradigm, and the first thing I do is not get them to feel their pelvic bowl, because I've only been doing this work for a month, but get them to stop eating crap, right? Which is still sort of, it feels top down, but a friend and teacher of mine, Glenn Livingston, talks about like you don't start doing forensics until you put out the fire, right? So what I'm working on is now getting people to, like when I get people to impose their will on their eating for a while and they stop stuffing their face with junk food, then they can start to feel the gap that has been caused by their separation from their own embodied being. And so in a certain sense, I'm using the tools of separation. And so that's what I'm playing with. Like, I don't want to reinforce it at the same time as, I have to sort of transition people into, is this making any sense? Like
yeah, and I can recontextualize it a little, because it's akin to what I do in the workshop. There, when we are coursing through a familiar neural pattern, we need conscious awareness to disrupt it. And so I will, in the workshop, I will direct people to bring their awareness to the pelvic floor, to feel the pelvic floor release to the breath. And they're doing it deliberately. I'm not saying, oh, just feel your body and let it breathe how it wants to, because that'll slop them back into the neural pattern. But the conscious effort, like willpower, eventually exhausts itself. So that deliberate paying attention has as its goal a new sensitivity, not a domination of the self, but a new sensitivity, a new neural pathway, and then that will carry us. So it's an interim phase. It's a necessary interim phase to bring conscious awareness to, look, that's junk. Don't put it in your body. In the same way that I say, look, you're driving your breath from your sternum. Let's find another way to do it. So it's an activation of our learning. It's a disruption of a pattern that requires conscious effort. But to say this is the, to say the willpower is how you need to live, is to ultimately defeat yourself, because you're in self-conflict.
Hmm. Right. And that's one of the things I was thinking about, because one of the constructs that I use to help people is something I borrowed from my friend Glenn Livingston, who wrote a book called Never Binge Again, which is based on rational recovery by Jack Trimpey, which says we there's like the part of us that wants to eat junk food is a survival drive, right? So that we're inherently programmed to get our caloric needs met in an environment of food uncertainty. So wherever there's high calorie density food, we're going to go for it. And we happen to live in a world now in which it's available 24/7, cheap, convenient, socially acceptable, addictive, highly marketed. And so we want to take that internal voice and separate from it. So we don't think that that's our higher self. And I found it to be very effective with people, to give it a name. Some people call it the pig or the food demon or the parasite that just wants, and to separate from it. But at the same time, in reading your work, thinking that's sort of fostering and reifying this internal conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I would recontextualize that. I don't have an issue with survival drive, but I think there's a deeper root to it, which is the disconnection from your being. When you disconnect from your being, you feel insecure. Your survival is uncertain.
Hmm.
And you're trying to fill that void of uncertainty with food. So again, it's that disconnection from being, that is the root of it, as I see it. I don't feel a survival drive to cram myself with junk food. I just don't, because I come back to the security of my being, and I feel in harmony with the world in a way that makes that distasteful and unnecessary. And it doesn't mean I won't pick up a piece of chocolate and eat it, but I eat one piece of chocolate. I don't eat 3 chocolate bars.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't outlaw the experience, but it's moderated in relationship with the whole. So what gets us into trouble is those parts of us that are unintegrated. Any part of us that is unintegrated will remain reactive. So to name that survival drive the pig or the saboteur or whatever is to already sort of close the door on integration. That reactive energy will continue to live until it's been integrated. And we, then that job, in a way of surrendering to wholeness, is precisely the journey of recognizing what within us is unintegrated and understanding it as an orphaned energy that is at odds. It's been separated from the energy of our being in the same way that a single starling can be separated from the flock of starlings that swims through the sky as this almost organism. And to bring that energy, that orphaned energy, into contact with your being, it will harmonize it in the same way that the movement of a lone starling brought into the flock of starlings will be harmonized. And also the eyes and ears of that starling now join that flock and add a new sensitivity to it. So the integration of an energy, bringing it back into your being, will newly sensitize you to the world and will disarm the reactivity that makes you reach for what ultimately is harmful to you.
Hmm. So you talk about self mastery, right? Which is sort of the model that I have implicitly been using, and you point out that linguistically having a master makes you a slave, and so that self mastery really is about an enslaved self that you're constantly trying to manage. your actions, your behaviors, your impulses, and because like the parrot, the two poles seem to be either I manage them or I'm out of control. But the two have something in common, that they're both on the pole of I don't trust myself. Right, and you're saying that learning how to experience the world through your body, as opposed to just through your head, produces trust in a way that someone who hasn't experienced it simply can't fathom.
Yeah, so the agenda of our culture, the underlying imperative of our culture is to take charge of and master and organize it. And we organize our bodies, and we organize our eating habits, and we organize our schedules, and we organize our relationships, and we organize our careers, and we organize bloody everything. And we are, in the same way that we've been desensitized to wholeness, we're not even aware of the possibility of surrendering to wholeness in such a way that we feel ourselves being organized by the present. So there is a harmony to the present that is attuned by everything that exists. And there is guidance in that harmony, but we're so locked into the boundary of the self and the agenda of organizing it that we become forgetful that it's there. And to recover bit by bit, to recover that spaciousness within the body that brings you back to the core of your being, is to be able to risk and attune to that infinitely subtle, infinitely informed harmony that will guide your every step. But it's how we have survived as hunter-gatherer cultures, is to allow ourselves to be organized by the present, by the whole that knows. I mean, all the attributes we assign to our objectified God also belong to the present. The present is omniscient. Everything that is happening in the universe is affecting every other molecule within it. It's this phenomenally attuned whole, and the present is omnipotent. It births everything that comes into existence, and of course the present is omnipresent. But just I'd love for your listeners to entertain the possibility that you can give up the frantic race of trying to organize yourself and keep it all together, and recover that embodied sensitivity that enables you to be organized by the present.
Right. So there's a few things that you wrote that I think are very relevant to this issue of people just becoming healthier, better in themselves through their habits. One is that you said self-improvement tends to pull us into self-tyranny. Now, you used the word tyrant earlier, quoting Joseph Campbell as self-achieved independence. And independence, you point out, means we're disconnected. We're on the hill. We're overlooking, overseeing, supervising.
Separate from.
And he says that actually, and then you write, disconnection from the present means disconnection from enough. And that basically all of our addictions are trying to, I can't remember who said it, but trying to find a vitamin in a bag of M&Ms. You have to eat an infinite number of M&Ms before you're going to find something nourishing in it. And that's kind of what we're doing, because we're cut off from the true source of what feeds us. We're going to try to eat anything, and because it doesn't nourish us, we have no choice but to keep eating.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at that concept of enough. As long as you've disconnected from your being, and your being is your only single true security in life, It's all you've got, and it's more than you could ever need to come back to the security of your being. But you disconnect from that, and there is scarcity. And I mean that it's just the state of your being is scarcity of being, and you want to compensate for that. And as long as you feel that scarcity in the body, there will never be enough. And our culture has obliterated the concept of enough. I mean, what's enough money? What, is it 3 billion? No. Because somebody who has $3 billion still needs more and still needs more. And what's enough information? Like, well, there's not enough information. I need to go online. There's all this stuff. I need to, and what's enough of anything? We've lost that sense. And so that's what's enough food, what's enough rest, what's enough anything, what's enough doing it. So to come back within that scarcity of being, we have substituted order for harmony. We want to order and organize, and order is the opposite of harmony. Order is top down. It's idea being imposed on a system to make it a certain way. Harmony is a property within an organic whole in which every part of that whole yields without resistance to every other part. And then the whole comes into harmony. And that, with the boundary around the self, that's what we prohibit ourselves from experiencing. And all of that craving, that restlessness that characterizes our culture can come to rest in the harmony of the larger being when we come back to rest in the harmony of our personal being.
Right. One of the most profound points you make is that our society is essentially a reflection of each of our relationships with our own bodies. And so the work of me getting healthy, losing 30 pounds, getting off my meds can feel selfish, self-centered, trivial in the, what I really should be doing is marching, signing petitions, running for office. And yet you point out that the way, the male head dominates and silences the female pelvic bowl has to be reflected in the way our society, male-dominated achievement and independence, silences and subjectifies the female principles of felt relationship and harmony. That really the work we're doing on ourselves could not be more global or political.
Absolutely. And I mean, what we've locked into as a culture is a mistrust of anything that is not top down. So it's like the head should be in charge, and it dominates the body, and that top down relationship is at one and the same time a domination of the male part of us over the female part of us, as you said, and all that is reflected in our culture. Every organization in our culture has a leader, and in every organization that leader is called the head of the organization. And that's what we're locked into. And we take charge of our lives from the head, and we manage our personal relationships from the head, and we have a top-down relationship with nature, which is absurd because our very breath depends on nature. To presume that we can dominate nature is just tragically short-sighted.
Right. And a beautiful paradox or irony is that what the tyrant wants more than anything is sort of freedom and security, right? And when you look at our culture, entrepreneurs talk about freedom. Like, my lifestyle wants to give me freedom, which means freedom from having to do unpleasant things. And you pointed that the richer we get individually and as a society, we don't actually become more independent, we become more infantilized. right? Can you
Absolutely.
say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we as you grow into adulthood and you have kids of your own, you move into service. But but it seems in our culture with this fantasy of independence, suddenly you don't do your own laundry. You have people to do it for you. You don't cook your own meals. You have people to do it for you. It's like you're an infant sucking on the teat of the world, and everyone does everything for you, so you never have to feel inconvenienced. And the drive behind that is is the search for security. The tyrant is obsessed with security because the tyrant understands that freedom is found in security. And what the tyrant wants is to be safe. Ultimately, that's why the mythological castle with its battlements and ramparts to ensure safety. Well, what the tyrant fails to understand is that life isn't safe. It just isn't.
Hmm.
You get sick, you get injured, you get hurt, you die. Everyone who's lived has died to the best of our knowledge. It's life isn't a safe enterprise, and so the tyrant is reacts to that with fear and retracts back into trying to manufacture safety. In the meantime, even though there's no real safety, there is such a thing as real security. And that real security is found in the body, in the core of your being, that you can come back to. So where the tyrant seeks freedom and security, the hero seeks security in freedom. It's the freedom of surrender, the freedom of letting go, the freedom of plummeting down to the ground of your being that brings you back to security.
Mm. So I want to talk forever, but there's other things in the world. I want to end with something that I just loved, that when you're talking about like the way we can fulfill our addictions, the way we can eat irresponsibly and smoke things and take in Facebook and Instagram and all this, is actually a sense of entitlement. And you contrast entitlement with gratitude, so that the two can't exist at the same time in the same consciousness. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you're entitled to something, there's no need to feel gratitude towards it. It's your entitlement. It's your right. What place does gratitude have in that? Um, if you receive something without a sense of entitlement and you feel the gift of it in this moment, even to receive the gift of breath from trees as the exhalations of forests move into your body and become you through the whirlpool of the self and then release out. And you realize the nature of that gift and you're not entitled to it. It's a gift that you feel in this moment, and then how could you not feel gratitude for it?
Hmm. Nice. Because for me, like that changes, just having that sense of gratitude changes my relationships with things that otherwise I might overconsume. Like on my run this morning, I realized that maybe it's not a coincidence that the things I read on Facebook is called a feed.
Oh, good. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, what, who else gets feed? Cattle, right?
Beautiful.
Animals that are that are designed to consume until they're slaughtered. And yet, like, there's things I read on Facebook that just touch me deeply. Yep. And the difference isn't the platform or the advertising. It's my relationship to it. And since Facebook, it's kind of a pity that Facebook is free, right? Like if I paid $100 a year for it, I might value it more. But bringing gratitude even to my food choices makes me think twice about just, I'm just going to eat because I'm entitled. Like I can't, if I'm not entitled to it, I can't satisfy my every impulse and craving.
Yeah, and there's another quality that I'd love to just mention, which is the quality of spaciousness. That in gratitude, as you feel gratitude, there is a spaciousness to your being, and you feel that. And I think the more spaciousness there is in your body, like the spaciousness in a bell that allows it to ring, the more ease and spaciousness there is in your sense of the world around you. And what happens, we are so committed to doing, we've dissociated doing from being, so that we commit to doing, and doing contracts us. And that feed, that Facebook feed, that's so lovely, Howard, how you associate that with the cattle. You can feel as you're sitting at the computer that the contraction of your being, like your awareness contracts onto that screen and this thing. And then, you may hit a story that touches your heart. And again, you feel that dilation and that spaciousness. And it's a quality that our culture doesn't bring our attention to, because we trust being stuffed. We want our head to be full of ideas. We want our heart to be full. We don't trust emptiness, but there is, in the quality of emptiness or spaciousness, the ability to be filled, like a valley is ready to be filled by a river running through it.
Beautiful. Well, so, and I mean, one last thing, like those are words, like the body spaciousness. How do people begin to move beyond, okay, those are nice words, and I can sort of picture intellectually what that might be, but I don't know what he's talking about. How do people start to move? And maybe this is an invitation for you to talk about your work, your books, your workshops, your website, or maybe, some words of initial pointing where people can begin to experience what you're talking about rather than just taking it in from the head.
Yeah, I mean, the great challenge and reward of my work is that every exercise or practice I've developed is a means of disclosing a pattern that our culture has imposed on our neurology. And it's a pattern that diminishes our experience of being and our ability to live fully in the present. So not to underestimate the challenge of recovering spaciousness, because all the cultural messaging in which we are immersed is urging us in the other direction. In the workshop, I guide people as effectively as I can over 2 days into recovering choice for themselves. If you're not aware of a pattern, if you're not aware that your breathing is top down, it just, well, that's how I breathe, that's normal. How can you even begin to question that pattern? So to find the release of the pelvic floor that enables a bottom-up breath, the experience of a bottom-up breath, and all of it, everything I propose is based first in experience. So where to point them? There's a set of 8 exercises, audio exercises, on my website. I think they're $22 to download, but each one of them is a journey that facilitates that surrender to being, that surrender to wholeness, and I'd love for people to experience them. And in fact, there's one you can get for free just to see what it's like. On my website, you just sign up for the newsletter. You get it for free. And if you don't like the newsletter, which comes out like once every 3 months or something, you know, just unsubscribe.
Okay. And what's the website?
Website is philipshepard.com. And Philip is with one L, not two. And Shepherd is SHEPHERD, just like the guy who looks after sheep. philipshepard.com. There's an irony for you as well.
Great. And I'll include links to that, to the website and to your books in the show notes for today's episode. And mention your books as well so people can find them and start to dive in.
I'd love that. Yeah, my first book is called New Self, New World. My second book is called Radical Wholeness. And for people new to my work, I suggest they start with the second book rather than the first. It's an easier, more leisurely read. And if they really want to go deep, get the first book because it's a finer grained sort of examination of our culture and where we've come from and where we're at and how to move forward from there. Beautiful.
Well, Philip, thank you so much. First of all, thank you personally for your guidance on my own journey, not to wholeness, but to being in relationship with wholeness, right? As you've taught me. Thank you for the sensitivity that you bring to language and to the ways you point out, pathways to freedom. It's an honor to be sharing your insights with my friends and family and students, and hopefully
it's a particular pleasure talking through these things with you because you know my work and you're such a capable bridge to the listeners to draw out from it ways in which they can understand it. And I so appreciate all that you bring to the conversation.
Oh, well, I hope so. Because this feels extremely important to the world. Like, if I were, dictator of the world, I would put psychedelics in the water supply and I would have everybody read your work.
I think that's a great combination.
That'd be my first two edicts. But since the world works bottom up, not top down, we have to do it this way.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's a pleasure to be collaborating with you on that. It really is.
Great. And you do just a quick word about your workshops because they're all over. I discovered serendipitously, like 2 weeks after I found your book, that you were doing a workshop less than an hour for me. Tell us a little, for folks who might be interested in experiencing this in their body, a little bit about your workshops and where they can find out more.
Yeah, all my workshops are listed on my website. I mean, there are workshops that aren't there yet because they're still being finalized, but through this year and into 2020. I'd also like to just briefly mention my facilitators trainings because it's a passion for me to share this work as deeply as I can with people. So I have year-long facilitators trainings where we get together for 3 5-day periods at a retreat over a year and meet up once a week just to do an exercise and share a discussion. And in that year, there is such deep transformation. It's a joy. So all of that information is available on my website. I'd love to hear if you'd be willing your experience of the workshop because you came into it not really knowing what to expect.
Yeah. So my experience of the workshop, it was very gentle. So one of the things that I look for and I'm scared of in sort of transformational workshops is sort of a heroic like tenderization. Like you're gonna hit me with a mallet until I come out the way you want me at the other end, which I think, it has there's a legacy in sort of new age self-help of doing that. So I really appreciated that this was very gentle. It was also, especially day one, was some of the most challenging work I've ever done, especially around the exercises around breathing and talking. Right, which it's hard to describe, but essentially realizing the cultural pattern of when I start talking, my breathing changes in ways that it doesn't have to. And then sort of recognizing that, and we haven't talked at all about you and your story, and your journey to Japan at the age of 18, and your career as a stage actor. But it felt at the same time as I was in a personal growth workshop, I was in an acting masterclass, and acting turned out to be the opposite of what I thought it was. It turned out to be not acting. Yeah. To be present with skills as opposed to be presenting something. And so I think that has helped me a great deal, especially because I do a lot of group coaching calls, and the goal in group coaching is to be really present to a lot of dynamics, a lot of people, and it's these little Hollywood Squares galleries on a Zoom video, and so there's way too much to take in my mind, and I'm trying to be smart, and I'm trying to give value, and so to bring some of your work into those situations where I can think about breathing, through and from and into the pelvic bowl, where I think about releasing my breath through the roots. There's a way in which I feel like I became more present and more effective without having to get better or smarter or try harder or accomplish anything. That I became, and this would have sounded absurd and self-aggrandizing to me 3 months ago, but I become an instrument of something as opposed to the wielder of the instrument.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Howard.
So I would say that's so far. My experience of those 2 days is still unfolding, but that's what percolates.
It's lovely. Thank you for that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, Philip, thank you so much for the generosity of spirit and wisdom and time. And I really urge everyone to go find your work, because I think it in a very gentle, common sense way is a pointer towards how we turn this ship around, how we live our legacy as human beings at this really critical moment. So thank you so much. Such an honor to spend this time with you.
It's a joy every moment of it, Howard. Thank you so much. It's I so appreciate the invitation and the resonances that you make room for within the conversation. I really do.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
Yeah.